and welcome to episode 6 of Graceful, a Pace of Grace podcast where we explore the abundant grace of God in every aspect of our lives. I'm your host, Christy Chella. Today's episode marks the end of our Month of Love series. What an incredible journey this has been. Episode 1 was Graceful Beginnings. Episode 2 was Grace Within. And today's episode is The Grace to Stay. Joining me again on this insightful topic as we conclude is my amazing husband, Chikombe. And as we speak into this topic, we're super excited that you're here with us. Let's get into it. I am thrilled to be getting into today's episode because in my books, it's really a milestone. You know, we started this discussion and this series in this month of love, not having a full scope of how this would turn out. But we trusted God that He would lead us somewhere with this content and this particular series. Our prayer really was that we'll be not only blessing our audience, you guys, the ladies and gentlemen that are listening to us right now, but that we too will be blessed and refreshed, right?
Absolutely.
So it's been an amazing journey. Do you have any 2 cents insight as we get into today's episode?
I mean, just to echo exactly what you've said, that it's been a milestone. We are so grateful and glad to have come this far, and truly it has been a time of refreshing for both you and I, going into each week, looking up topics and wanting to delve into it, just talking between you and I. That's been really fun.
It's been refreshing. Thank you for doing this with me. All right. Now for today's topic, the grace to stay. It brings us to talking about something that I feel like we rarely talk about nowadays when it comes to marriage. And that is the concept of marriage being a covenant. This is something that people rarely talk about nowadays. When you look at society in the church circles as well as outside the church walls, divorce rates are so alarmingly high. There's divorce rates that are just super high, regardless of where you look, whether it's in the church or just society, in the community, anywhere and everywhere you look. It's like the concept of marriage being a lifelong covenant that 2 people make is really not discussed and not even thought about. Initially, if you look at, I would say maybe some decades ago, maybe even 10 decades ago, 20 decades ago, the issue of divorce was really a Hollywood thing.
Right.
You would only hear about that through the celebrities, when you watch entertainment news or you read a magazine or you watch TV or something. That's where we would see alarming rates of divorce.
Yeah.
But now it's like it's not even rare that you hear about divorce cases. It's like every single person that knows someone who's either been divorced or they're going through a divorce. And so when we talk about the grace to stay, embracing the covenant of marriage, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about this? What's a covenant? I know we know the layman's definition of what a covenant is, but from your personal perspective, when you hear the grace to stay, embracing the covenant of marriage, what does that bring to mind?
So when you talk about divorce rates and how it is that this phenomenon is become, is it phenomenal or phenomenal?
Phenomenon?
Phenomenal.
It's spelled as phenomenon, but I guess the pronunciation is phenomenon. Whatever it is. Well, they know what we're talking about.
We have fun with our pronunciations, right? So whatever that is, the phenomenal is something where for you and I, when we got married, it was actually a shock as witnessing peers getting divorced. I recall so many times in our early years of marriage. I mean, we're married for like how many years?
This year will be 12.
12, okay, 12 this year. But we were married for like the first year, second year, and we heard about peers. Like people our age.
It was close to
we
home.
Got married. I got married to you at what, 25?
You were 26. You were 26, I was 23. Yeah.
I mean, and then people getting divorced at that age, it's unbelievable. So anyway, getting into the question that you asked, the first thing that comes to mind for me when you talk of covenant, and this is funny, I'll share this. Your mother-in-law would say this to me.
Yeah.
You make your bed and you sleep in it.
Yeah.
You know, just that analogy of you make your bed and you sleep in it. You're getting into something that you're committed to, that you're gonna be in. You're vested in it, right?
Yeah.
I go back to Genesis 2:24.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. The word that I'm picking out here is cleave. That word, and reading from the Strong's, the word is daubak. Okay? A primitive root word to properly impinge, that is to cling or to adhere. Figuratively, to catch by pursuit, abide, fast, cleave, fast together, follow closely, hard after, be joined together, keep fast, overtake, pursue, hard, stake, take.
Amazing.
So can you imagine? I mean, to cleave, you're in this, okay? You've made a decision, you're going to pursue, you're going to abide, you're going to follow.
Yeah.
You know, it takes work, right?
Right.
We touched a little bit in our last episode about
That's right.
the work that's involved in sticking together, right? It takes work. So, hey, that's loaded. I can go on forever.
That is truly loaded. But that's the thing, really, you know, when you think about it, the issue of marriage being a covenant is something that we should have in sight at all times.
Right.
We shouldn't forget the seriousness of it, you know, the seriousness of marriage being a covenant. And one thing that should remind us is the vows that we make.
Yeah.
You know, when two people are getting married, you know, we exchange these vows to one another. Those should be a constant reminder of this covenant that we have. And sometimes we think it's just for that day. It's just for the ceremony of the wedding. It's just for that moment when we're in our wedding gown and we're before our family, our friends, and then the preacher, and then we exchange these vows. But these vows are to be a memorial for us, a constant memorial.
Right.
And I'm saying this in alignment with what you just said about how serious, you know, the concept of marriage being a covenant should be to us. And so touching on the vows, you know, it's a promise. These are promises that we make, just like any covenant away from marriage, any contract, so to speak, any agreement, any covenant that is made. For example, you sign a work contract or you sign an agreement. There are conditions and there are regulations and there are stipulations that the underlining factors of what that contract or that covenant is when you're signing it. So our vows in marriage really play that role, to be that constant reminder, like, hey, don't forget that this is what you promised to do in sickness and in health, you know, for rich or for poor, until death do us part. These are the promises that we need to fulfill at all times in upholding this covenant called marriage. And it requires constant effort, constant work. Like you said, marriage is work. It's not child's play.
Yeah.
You know, and so it being a covenant means that it requires constant effort and a willingness to extend grace to one another. You know, by us fulfilling these vows and us really being the best that we can be for one another, we are standing in agreement with what we signed up.
Exactly.
We are standing in agreement with what this covenant is. And when we have the desire to fulfill our end of this covenant, God gives us the grace to stay.
Absolutely. I just wanted to touch real quick when you talked about the seriousness.
Yeah.
And then you reminded me, you talked about like even just natural vows and oaths that we would make. You sign a contract.
Right.
You tell somebody you're going to do something. It reminds me of Jesus when he was talking about oath. Let me get to this.
Yeah.
This is Matthew 5. Okay, Matthew 5 and verse 37. Jesus is talking about oath, and I love this scripture verse. But let your yes be yes and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is for the evil one.
Right.
It's something that I've taken to heart growing up as a child of God, as this should be our mindset. And for our listeners that have been listening and following along with us through this series, you guys have heard me say this many times. It always goes back to your baseline, your foundations. What do you take as principle, right? So if somebody is getting into marriage not having a simple principle of, hey, let my yes be yes, my no be no. What more the marriage, right?
Right. It affects everything.
It affects everything. Yep.
It sure does. It sure does. And talking about your yes being your yes and your no being your no, and how that, boils down to everything else that you do.
Exactly.
Covenants and agreements as we know them. For me, my perspective about covenants and agreements is that they tend to come with tests,
Right.
to see if you will fulfill your end of the bargain. So whether it is a work contract, whether it is a marriage covenant that you're making, whatever the situation may be, covenants and agreements have a nature that brings testing.
Wow.
Situations and circumstances will arise, to see if you will fulfill your end of the agreement. So let's get personal. Like let's get personal for a second here, for a minute, okay? Let's highlight some of the things that we have been through as a couple that were more like a test to see if we would stand on the covenant that we made together as husband and wife. And I can go first on this one because there's been a couple of things that we've been through. There's been a couple of situations that proved to be seasons of testing to see, are you going to stick to this thing that you signed up for?
Yeah.
Are you still going to be faithful? Are you still going to be there when the riches have gone?
Right.
So one example I can cite, and you can cite whatever other example that you can think of. But the first one that I will cite is where finances are concerned.
Right.
You and I being newlyweds. I was about to say newlyweds. You and I being newlyweds, in the first year of our marriage, we were blessed by God and we conceived, right? In our first year of our marriage, we conceived our first child, which was a beautiful experience. But shortly after that, we began to experience some trying times financially. You talk about job losses. You talk about, suddenly not being financially stable, not being able to afford the kind of life that we desire it to have. Those times were very trying for us as a young couple. If we were not strong, if we didn't have God really as our baseline, like you just said, if we didn't have God as our foundation, I feel like those are some of the things that would have broken our covenant. Those are some of the things that would have made us second guess what we signed up for. Like I didn't sign up for this, know. I came into this with dreams and aspirations and, thinking everything was going to be rosy. But when reality hit, things started, life happened. Life happened. We had situations where we were just not able to afford the lifestyle that we desired. And we ended up moving out of a rented house to move into an unfinished house.
That's actually where I was going to go.
An unfinished house, which didn't have any doors. It didn't have any electricity. It didn't have any water.
Running water.
We literally were starting from scratch. And yet our peers, our friends were seemingly doing much, much better than we were. Now, imagine if we didn't have the backbone to stand on the covenant that we made. Imagine if we didn't have the perspective of we are in this to the very end. We would have given up. So
there's one perspective right there. We're in this to the very end. But I remember one perspective you and I both had. And that brought joy to us each time, which was always, as long as we're doing this together.
There you go.
We're experiencing this together. We're going to live through this together. We're going to walk through this together. We had that mindset. And to be honest, trying times, they came quick for us.
They came so quick.
For those who know us personally, our family, friends back home in Zambia, the details of it, I mean, it came quick. But God is so faithful. God is good. I mean, looking at you, honey, you're asking like which moment or time. I remember when we had to move out of a rented apartment and move into this unfinished house.
Which we were building.
Walking it back a little bit, we had to leave that rented apartment, okay? Because of obviously job loss and
not being able to afford rent.
And hey, so what are we going to do? When the rubber hits the road, you need to get going.
That's it.
So we moved out. We made the decision, both you and I, as husband and wife, as a couple, said, okay, let's move into this home that, by the way, we were already planning before we got married, when we were still courting and, building up to our marriage. But this home wasn't fully completed.
We didn't have
any running water. It wasn't tiled. It wasn't plastered.
Yeah.
For those who know anything about construction, building with concrete bricks, the way we do it back home, it wasn't plastered. The house wasn't ready, bottom line. And we were just expecting our firstborn then.
Yeah.
But you were so humble. You're so gracious in your approach and in the way that you took that situation that, hey, we're going to figure things out together. And that we did. We absolutely did. And speaking to what you're saying, it being a test, to be honest, looking back now and where we are now, God saw us through, okay? The testing period came and we walked through it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you feel like you don't want to, gloat. And, but it's like we passed the test. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Simply put.
I mean, you even have that chip off your shoulder, like, we passed the test. We're good. Yeah.
And it's amazing that you bring that up, because I feel like it's important for couples to recognize when that time comes.
Absolutely.
To recognize when those tests come, because that's what helps you to overcome in those seasons. When you recognize that this is only for a season and the ultimate goal should be for you to endure to the end and come out stronger in the end, that will help you. That will help you. And it doesn't mean that when you overcome one test and that's the end, you'll never have any other test. The only beauty about it is that once you graduate, it's just like school, right?
Yeah.
When you take one test or one exam, you graduate to the next level.
Yep.
You graduate to the next level. It's like God says, okay, you're fit for this. So now that you have overcome this, now that you are able to stand strong and you're able to defeat this thing that almost defeated you, I will give you greater levels. I will give you higher ground for you to step on. Those higher grounds will come with greater tests, but because now you've been equipped with the grace to handle what you handled before, you're able to handle anything else that comes thereafter.
That is so true.
So
I love that analogy.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a pre-K right now.
Yeah.
We've got a second grader
and a fifth grader going into middle school.
So all of that, when you're talking about the test, I mean, I was looking at Amia the other day and she's able to go through all of her alphabet.
Yeah, that's our pre-K.
That's our pre-K. Amia, she's going through all of her alphabet, very confident, and she knows it well. So I can imagine she's probably going to go into the next stage.
Yes.
Which is probably like Itai and being able to read confidently, pick up a book like Jada.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you're saying. Levels. You go on to the next test. I mean, tests come. Yep.
Once you overcome, you go to the next level and we graduate and we continue. You keep it moving.
Yep.
You keep it moving. This past Sunday at church, we heard something very profound by our guest speaker. That was Pastor Craig Groeschel, and he's an amazing speaker. Those of you who know Pastor Craig Groeschel, he's just amazing, especially when it comes to topics of marriage and things like that. He's really anointed. He mentioned something, and he said that in a marriage, two people become one flesh in order to pursue the one, and that one that they pursue is God. And so in essence, he was saying that God is number one and your spouse is number two. Okay. This reminder for me, or this analogy rather for me, reminded me of Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 12, which says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Emphasizing that this covenant that we are in called marriage, we're not in it alone. We're not in it alone. We are two individuals that come together to form one flesh, and together we pursue this one God. So he becomes our priority, and then our spouse becomes our next after God. And so if you know that you're in it, having God as your pursuit, having God as your anchor, having God as your foundation, having God as the pillar, I feel like that should give you great assurance.
Yeah.
That should give you great confidence, because the one that you pursue together, the one that you are chasing after together as a couple, has all power to sustain you.
Yeah.
He has all power to help you. He has all power to see you through. So for those who refuse to see marriage as a covenant, I feel like that's what they're missing out on.
That is so true.
The
That's
ability to
fact.
lean completely on God.
Yeah.
Because he's the missing factor.
He's the missing factor. And it becomes a thought pattern of, leaning on your
Right.
finances,
Yes.
leaning on
There you go.
individuals, leaning
Yeah.
on personalities, leaning on, something like beauty,
which fades.
which fades.
So when it fades, what do you do? When the finances go, what do you do?
When that handsome guy stops looking handsome and buff and, bulky, yeah.
Life happens. What
Life
do you do?
happens.
When you make those things the third strand in your marriage and they fade
It's bound
away
to break.
and they break,
Yeah.
what do you do? But
Yep.
when God is that third strand in your marriage, you can overcome
It's
anything.
gonna hold.
You can overcome anything. You
Yep.
can endure to the end. You can endure to the end. So viewing marriage as a covenant, in my opinion, really is such a blessing because it says a lot about what power you're standing on as a couple. Because anything birthed by God is sustained by God. Amazing. The grace to stay is available. The grace to stay is available. And this is something that you will rarely hear today, in today's times. A lot of people are quick to throw in the towel. A lot of people are quick to call it quits.
Yeah.
A lot of people are quick to dismiss their spouse, to dismiss the one that they claim to love, because of situations and circumstances. But one thing we need to know, and we want to encourage you today, is that there is grace to stay, which is available, because marriage being a covenant is meant to last.
Absolutely.
Marriage being a covenant is for the long run. And for God to intend it that way, he has given sufficient for you to go the whole 9 yards.
He gives sufficient grace
for you to go all the way.
Wow.
2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 8 says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work.
Amen. I feel so strongly right now for any of our listeners that might be going through a hard time, especially those that are married couples.
Yeah.
Reach out, okay?
Yeah.
Reach out to us. We are an open book.
Yeah.
Both you and I, we believe strongly that the Graceful Podcast is a tool that God will use to impact, our generation, our peers, and the generations that are coming. We've been through it. The stage at where we are at right now, we feel and we are at a stage where we can speak into the reality of what a grace-filled marriage life is.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that was spirit-led. What he said right there was spirit-led. It's not even part of the script. Okay, so that's how you know that God is speaking. So I'll just re-emphasize what my husband just said. If you're listening to this right now and you feel like you are wanting to have a grace-filled marriage, you are wanting to have a grace-filled relationship, but you just don't know where to start from. Or even if you're in a place, like he said, where there's some form of brokenness in the midst of what you already have, and you're trying to pick up those pieces to have something better, we're here to help you. When we say that we've been through it, we're not saying that we have like this 100 years of experience or whatever, but we have had our share of experience. Okay, we've had our share of valley low experiences and mountain high experiences, and the in between experiences as well. We have been there, we have been there.
It's really just us coming alongside you, holding a hand and walking that path together. The little insights, the little conversations that we would have together, that would definitely help and take you through it. Whenever you're going through an experience and you feel you're alone, the enemy is trying to place you alone. Isolate you. That's the worst possible place and time you could be at.
Yeah.
And I feel, just opening that up to our audience, like, hey, reach out to us, speak to us. We are straightforward, open people, just a conversation. We develop a friendship. And let's live life together.
Indeed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of the Month of Love series. We trust that the Lord, in his own special way, has ministered to you, and that he's given you realization that a grace-filled marriage is one that stands the test of time, because a grace-filled marriage is filled with God's grace, which is more than enough. God's grace, which is all sufficient and all that you need at all times. What an enriching discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on this special episode of Graceful. Let us know in the comments how this Month of Love series has blessed you. And don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to share this podcast with others. Join us again next week for another insightful episode of Graceful. Remember, a graceful life is a transformed life. Until next time, embrace the pace of grace and stay graceful.